Well, hi, this is Bob Odell with RootSource. And in these interviews that we do with RootSource, we interview Israeli Jews and we interview Christians who love Israel and the Jewish people. But underneath that, what we're really trying to accomplish in these interviews is to reveal the glory of God, God's stories, and what He's doing in His nation and in His people and in those who love His nation and His people. And I think the story that we're going to tell today will not disappoint in that area. But I want to tell you in advance, this is a story that has a lot of layers to it. It is something that I want to encourage you to see past the story to the glory of God that is being revealed within the life and story of our guest today, who is Victoria Sarvadi.
How you doing, Bob?
Very good.
Good.
Thank you for agreeing to this interview. It's been something that I've been looking forward to. I have read your book, and we're going to get into that. But first, I just like to set a little bit of context in terms of the present day. I mean, you have a very interesting story, and we'll be going into that. But let's talk about the things that are happening right now in your life. We are in McKinney, Texas.
Yes.
Which is a fairly nice neighborhood in the Dallas area. We're in Texas. Our nation, America, has been extremely blessed. Texas as a state has been blessed. Dallas as a location, and Houston, major cities of the United States. And there is much blessing that God has brought through various means. And I understand that your story is no exception to that.
We're very thankful. God is good, and we're happy to be where we are. We know that His hand is upon this country and upon our state, and I believe that even in our cities we are lining up with the vision of Israel. I mean, we see Dallas and Israel lining up in so many ways, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, we really feel the blessing of God where we are exactly.
So I'd like to be able to communicate to our viewers just a sense of the level of blessing, tangible, material blessing that you have received, and I'd even go more than that you have worked for, you and your husband. And I'd like to just lay in a few pieces that, if I can. Your husband is Paul Sarvadi. Tell us about his position.
Paul is the CEO of Insperity. It is an organization, actually it's a company, an HR company that is nationally acclaimed and has sales offices in every major city in the United States, if not more than one, maybe as many as 6 in some of the major cities, sales offices. Corporate offices are in Kingwood, Texas, near Houston.
Yes.
And he started this company back in the late 80s and with another co-founder. And it is now a publicly held company, and it has grown beyond what we could ever imagine.
The company has, you can see it online, it's public information, has over 3,000 direct employees.
Right.
How long has the company been public?
It went public in 1997.
Okay.
And
so over 20 years?
Over 20 years.
And your husband wasn't just brought in as CEO in the later years. What you said earlier was he was part of founding this company?
God gave him a vision, really at a time when he really was, I would say, broken in so many ways, but he was very spiritually acute and strong. He had just had several business failures back to back. We just felt like, God, where do you want us? We were just reaching and grasping for direction. He had given Paul several business successes, and we were now in another phase of life to expand and go somewhere else, to do something new. And we just felt like we were hitting some dead ends and some bottoms. And so when God gave him this vision, I was really kind of fearful that this was going to be another one of those failures.
Mm-hmm.
But Paul was so ready spiritually to listen and obey, and just not to be one side or the other of God's will, but just to listen on a day-to-day basis as to what he wanted him to do. And that made a big difference in the success of the company.
Now, you can see online today that the company Insperity, which is formerly known as Administaff,
Right.
and which is also, that name is also, a lot of people know that name. But the company today is one of the 700 largest companies in the United States. And let me see if I can summarize the early success of the company. Tell me if I understand this right. What Paul and the founders did, what they noticed was that small and medium-sized businesses were trying to focus on growing their own businesses, but they have been saddled by regulation and the needs to take care of employees with HR benefits, human resource benefits. And Paul wasn't the first to see it, but was the first to move on trying to find a solution that would allow these small and medium-sized businesses to tap into an infrastructure that would allow them to serve their own employees and be able to focus better on what they do best,
Right.
and outsourcing human resources.
Exactly. It's hard to do your own business, sell your widgets or whatever your business is, whether it's a product or a service, but you still have all the daily grind and all the regulations for the government and all the HR demands and the need for staff, and so it becomes a major part of your expenses and your attention, and it takes you away really from actually producing what your business was intended to produce in the first place. And so he comes in, and our company helps these companies with all those regulatory issues and all the employment issues. It keeps them up to date and pretty much becomes the co-employer of that company that is now a client company.
Tell you something. You know how I knew that about Insperity? It's not that I went and read up on it. I was one of those smaller, medium-sized businesses.
Okay.
We were in Austin. We had a company that was based in Israel, but we were expanding in the U.S. And I had to deal with all these decisions about what do we do with HR. We're not big enough to
Right.
have our own HR staff. So I walked through these very same things. We didn't know about Administaff and Insperity in that time frame, but now I wish I had, because we made some mistakes along the way that took a lot of time and effort to unravel. And when you're the first to recognize this in a business, you recognize something, you find a way to bring a solution to the market, and you're the first in, you can create something. And
It's not so easy though.
it's not easy,
No.
but it's a lot easier to see the problem than to deliver on a solution to the problem. But if you do, then you can have the kind of success that we're talking about here,
We
which
had
you've been
to
blessed with.
actually create legislation for a new industry. So God led us in some very tricky,
That's interesting, yes.
major waters there that at Ministaff at the time really paved the way for the entire industry. And
Yes.
so, now there are laws and legislation that allows us to operate in every single state in the union.
Paul, your husband, is known as an excellent leader. Can you give us any example of how that might have been recognized?
Well, I think that you might be talking about whenever he received the Entrepreneur of the Year one year, sometime back, and we were in Austin, Texas, and he was
Austin.
Yes, we were in Austin, and he was ready to go up to receive this very prestigious award. And I was very excited for him, and I was dressed up in my little black dress with the red lipstick and the high heels, and just really, really ready to show the world, be that ornament on his arm. And so when he got up and they called his name, I just grabbed him and I kissed him on the cheek and left a big red lipstick mark on his cheek. I didn't even realize it until he was up on stage and the camera was, and the great big mega screens were behind him, and there was my mark. And you can
And
hear
everybody saw
you
it
can
then.
hear the crowd just kind of laughing a little bit, and he didn't even really know why.
Yeah.
I do admire him. He is an incredible leader, a great father, a good husband. I noticed that from the very beginning when I first met him as a young teenager. He
And I
always
want to
had the
get to that.
leadership skills.
I want to get to that in our next segment. But let's talk about where we are right now, because everything we've talked about so far could be true of any of the other 700 executives in major corporations, but you and your husband are doing something very different, and it starts with where we're sitting right now. Tell us about that.
Well, this is a product. We are at the Bethany Center in McKinney, Texas. This is a brainchild, I think. Really, it stems from a very early experience, which I know you're going to ask me about, as to what I think God wanted us to do in our lives to advance the kingdom and to be a part of what God's purposes are. And why are we even born? Why are we on this earth? And so what we have here at the Bethany Center is a educational center where we offer various classes. The Institute for Hebraic Christian Studies, which is Dr. Richard Booker's school for an associate's degree, we have a McKinney campus right here. So we offer those classes where people can work on their associate's degree, and mainly it's for ministry leaders who maybe are lacking that Hebraic aspect of their education. Many times they go to seminary, they get the very basic Greco-Roman education.
Yeah. You might learn Hebrew or something.
You might, but the main thing is to connect in to that first century understanding of the faith as it was in its infancy,
right.
as it was at its genesis.
Right.
And so, and many people want to understand that, and I think that's what we can offer here. We also offer Hebrew classes if you want to learn the language. We have a fellowship that meets here on Shabbat.
Tell us about that. What do you do?
Well, our Shabbat meetings, basically it started in my home. I came up to McKinney in 2008, and I kind of left a very full schedule in Houston, taking a sabbatical from it because there was so much that was going on in my life. Just decided to come up here and just regroup, and I felt like God was sending me in a different direction. I was the associate minister at a Hebraic congregation down there, and the executive director of a performing arts center, and of course our foundation as well. So I was teaching classes, probably 3 or 4 classes, and there was just so much going on, and I was working on my doctorate. So it was like I needed a break, and so I came up here. My grandkids live up here, and I just wanted to take some time off. And I was physically having some issues as well from, of course, all the stress all that was creating in me. And after a while, I just felt like it was time to start a Bible study up here, and I felt like the Lord really directed me to do so. But it was just in my home, very casual, nothing formal.
Yes.
And but the people that came invited friends, and it just began to grow. And I think our Bible study crossed all denominational lines. Nobody even knew what denomination you came from. And the reason is because everybody, I think it's intrinsic in us to understand the roots of where we come from. As a Christian, whenever we get past our denominational differences and we begin to realize that this is the faith of Yeshua that started in the first century, and it permutated to what it is today, and all these different 33,000 at least different denominations of Christianity. We got to have a common, denominator. We have to have that very beginning, genesis of the faith. And so that's what I teach, because that's what my education is in. And it's like everybody was hungry for that. And so the Bible study, the homes became a home church, and then the home church got too big for our homeowners association, and so we created this Bethany Center for that reason as well, to give a place for this Bible study to go to. And now we consider it a fellowship. It's not an organized church. That's not our model.
Right.
Our model is that first century model, going house to house. It's just that our house had to be expanded to a location that is more of a center where it can accommodate all of us.
So it is a fellowship. It's not like a private group of your friends that you invite here. It's you open it up.
We do open
right?
it up.
And
it's not majorly, advertised or anything
right.
like that.
You don't have billboards on.
No, we have a website, and we have a Facebook, and so it gets a lot of attention.
But it's available,
available.
And you do not restrict, who comes in and is part of this. I think this is very interesting because and your husband is fully a part of this.
Absolutely.
As well, right?
Yes.
He comes on Friday nights. He participates. I think this is very unusual and notable that you could go and you could have your own Shabbat celebration with you and your family, but you are opening up your heart and lives to people openly to come here and to celebrate Shabbat with you. Why? What is driving you to be so open?
Well, I believe that, the one thing that we must realize that, they'll know us by our love, or they'll know us by, our the fruits that we carry within us.
Yes.
And it's not something I'm saying, oh, we got to show love. I mean, it just kind of permeates through the people that come here. When I prayed about starting it, I asked God to send us people who loved him, who were dedicated to him, who wanted to really delve in and understand his word and to do it. We don't like to just play around and just absorb all the information but not do anything about it. Nor are we into just doing great deeds but not learning the deep things of the Spirit.
Yeah.
So we try to have a balanced approach to the faith and be accepting of all of those who have that same type of heart.
I've attended this a few times when I've been up in the Dallas area, and I noticed the openness, the fact that there's a lot of participation. It isn't just like you and Paul doing things. I mean, there's a lot of people that get involved. You get a lot of people involved in what's happening. You have different teachers come in. The other thing that caught me by surprise, and I have to tell on you on this, there was someone there and who had visited. You go around, and if someone is sort of new to come, you say hello and greet them and whatever.
Absolutely.
And so someone was being greeted, and then as a visitor, and you said, "No, they've been here before. Their family."
Right.
I'm just touched by that.
We connect to people on so many different levels. I think that they desire to connect to Yeshua in his first century setting, and that immediately makes us family. There's not, like I said, there's no denominations here. I have no idea what denomination a person comes from. Whether they're Catholic or Lutheran or Baptist or whatever. And I know that they've come from these different types of churches. But that's not what people are looking for. They're not looking to be a part of a denomination and have everybody think the same. They want to know the ways of Yeshua in that first century.
Yes.
What was his faith
Yes.
like? What the denominations have become is man's interpretation of the scripture and how we are to live, and be associated with a certain denomination. Whether we, are associated with the baptism as a Baptist and evangelism, or charismatic in the gifts, or all these different, I guess you would call them, characteristics.
Sure.
But when you understand who Yeshua is, and that he's different than the average Greco-Roman Christian that's out there, he wouldn't have gone to a church with a steeple at First and Main, and he wouldn't. What is Vacation Bible School in the first century? That it just doesn't. What was faith like then? And what we want to do is connect on that level. Teach us, Yeshua, what faith was like in that first century, so that we can implement that before there were all the different splinters and different denominational groups that sprung out of disagreements and fights and problems within the church. So going back to that, we all have that in common. So there's a familial connection immediately when a person wants that.
And in terms of teaching, you could say, as a follower of Yeshua, you want to learn only from messianic sources, but you also bring in and allow Orthodox Jews to speak from time to time. You want to share any?
What's interesting about, first of all, I think that's a providential movement for God to put it on the hearts of the Orthodox community to want to build a bridge to the Christian community. That was unheard of, years ago. But then again, on the other side of the coin, neither did Christians reach out to the Jewish community and say, we want to know more about you. And I can remember whenever we had a heart for Israel, and God just put it there. And it was supernatural, in my opinion. And how we wanted to help her in humanitarian ways. We wanted to connect to the Jewish people in personal ways. Those who bless, Abraham will be blessed. It's how God will judge the nations on how they treated Israel. And so we began to see this all in the Word and saying, this is God's heart. This is the apple of his eye. This is the place where he's going to set up his kingdom. This is the place that he has put his name upon. And he will pour out a spirit of grace and supplication upon the Jewish people. And we see that already happening. How, there's this, in the mind of a Christian, there's almost like, you've been sort of programmed to believe that God's turned his back on the Jewish people and now we're the center stage. But you cannot, argue with the scriptures that say that God is, especially in the Akrit HaYamim, the end of days, yes, how Israel will be that center stage again. And the nations will come against Israel, and God will judge the nations, and he will set up his throne in Israel. So all of these things we begin to realize, this is the key hinge pin. This is the center stage, if you will, for the Lord's purposes on planet Earth. And so we wanted to connect in every way we could to bless his people. And so we reached out in the late 90s. And at first, I think that a lot of the Jewish community was suspicious as to why you're doing this, and rightfully so, because of all the the different reasons that
there's a lot of history
that the church is responsible for, and they have good reason to be suspicious and concerned. But God had done a work in our heart, and it was hard to explain that. Well, now we see the turnabout is fair play. God is doing a work in the hearts of these Orthodox rabbis and teachers to reach out and create the bridge on the other side and extend the hand of fellowship. And
so any examples of who's been here?
Just in fact, tomorrow night we have David Nakrutman that's going to be here.
Great.
That will be sharing with us. And Gidon Ariel from Root Source is going to be back on Thursday, and he's been here several times, and we have also plugged into his Root Source Live and promoted that. We have Chaim Eisen that
Rabbi Chaim
comes
Eisen.
on a regular basis, and when we go to Israel, we take tour groups to Israel, and we normally connect to these different rabbis and Orthodox teachers when we go over there and expose our Christian friends who are wanting to get a real indigenous experience to connect on this level as well. We see in Scripture that 10 Gentiles will grab a hold of the talit or the hem of the garment of one Jew, and so we hear the Lord is with you. We see this happening right now, where we're saying, you've got a lot of wealth of knowledge. You have the teachings of the rabbis and the Mishnah. Jesus taught, he expounded on the Mishnah whenever the Talmudic teachings.
Yes.
Whenever he was teaching here in to his followers. And we as Christians aren't privileged, or we're not at least privy to the teachings of the Talmud. And so we don't realize even what it is, that these are a collection of sermons and stories and teachings
and
of the rabbis,
and ideas, and
of the Torah, of the scriptures, the Holy Scriptures. And Yeshua used those very Talmudic teachings and stories and expounded upon them. But we don't know that he's even doing that when he's talking about these different parables, that he's actually taking a Talmudic teaching and elaborating or whatever. And so there's so much rich history and understanding of these teachings that it's really nice to get that interpretation, because you've got to realize we are definitely Greco-Roman. We don't have a Hebraic understanding, a Hebraic mindset. We have taken things and we have created an understanding based on a very false mindset and position.
So let me ask you one more question on this segment. Genesis 12:3, blessing Israel and so forth. I've heard views on that, everything from, we should really not even focus on that. I mean, we should do what's right, but don't expect a blessing in return. All the way to, we should really focus on blessing Israel in order to get a blessing. There's nothing wrong with that. Where do you sit on that? And I guess, more importantly, you've been blessed. You and your husband have been blessed for so long. What came first? Your blessing or the blessing of Israel?
I haven't even thought about that. I think we bless in order to be obedient.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of what you get out of it. You may or may not receive a blessing in this life, but I know you receive the favor of the Lord, and because you love what He loves.
Yes.
And so, never should a person's motivation be, oh, I'm going to bless something so I can get a blessing. Their motivation should be, I'm going to bless because I want to be obedient to my Father. We love our children, and we bless them, and we don't expect anything in return from our children. And so I feel like it's the same way, with our Father, in heaven, that we want to bless Him. We want to, He's done so
Right.
much for us, and it's really out of a response of the love that He's shown for us. He showed us mercy. He showed us love. He showed us kindness, and so we want to give that back unto Him. And it happens to be in the direction He sends us, and that's
Amen.
Israel.
Amen. Well, stay with us. We'll be back in the next segment to continue this interview with Victoria Sarvadi.
Thank you.
Well, this is Bob Odell with Root Source, and we're back with Victoria Sarvadi. Victoria, thanks again for joining
You're
us.
welcome.
All right, so in our last segment, we talked about the incredible blessing that had come upon you and your husband. And I think from that segment, it might be possible for some people to say, you know what, maybe you're just riding your husband's coattails. But that's not really true, is it?
I don't know. We're kind of grab hold of both of each other, and where he goes, I go, and where I go, he goes. We support one another in the endeavors that God has put upon our hearts.
Well, that's an excellent answer. And I mean, just to avoid any doubt, you made a brief mention of it in the last segment, but your highest level of education that you've attained is?
A doctorate. I have a doctorate in first century Christianity and Second Temple Judaism. And understanding that first century understanding of the church, of the what became the church, the faith of Yeshua.
Okay, so I could call you Dr. Sarvadi for the rest of the interview if
You
I wanted
could.
to. Actually, I love the name Victoria, and we'll get to that later.
Okay.
So, in this doctorate that you've got, you want to mention some of the key influencers that
Right.
you sat under?
Okay. Well, it's very interesting how this came about, how I got my education. First of all, I started with the Institute for Hebraic Christian Studies with Dr. Richard Booker back in 1997, I think, and got an associate's degree with him, and it just only whet my appetite for more. I just could not get enough. By this time, we were connected to a lot of other scholars through Dr. Booker. We were connected to Dr. Brad Young, Dr. John Garr, Dr. Marvin Wilson, and Dwight Pryor, Dr. Dwight Pryor, several others that really ministered to us on so many different levels, personally as well as spiritually. And we have the Nathaniel Foundation, which is an organization that supports a lot of the different ministries and advocacy efforts concerning Israel. And one of the things that we actually supported was these colloquium for Hebraic scholars, and we have a ministry center, or it's actually a home up in the mountains of, I'll say mountains, the small little mountains of Arkansas.
Yeah.
And we have these colloquia there, and in the past, and we had twice at least 30 different scholars from all over the world come together to meet and discuss really what was happening across the world in the area of the Hebraic studies. And this happened in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the people I met there were just brilliant scholars. And one of the scholars was Dr. William Bean, and he had a school, a college, a Bible college in Redlands, California. And it was basically set up for graduate studies for pastors, like I said before, who have seminary degrees that really want to explore the Hebraic aspects of the faith. And so when I talked to Dr. Bean about that, I said, wow, I wish you had something here in, or in Houston. And he says, well, we can set up a satellite program and use your facility there at the Performing Arts Center if you can get me about 5 candidates that want a degree, a graduate degree. And so I was able to do that. So we streamlined a lot of the classes there. We had mini masters where the different scholars came in and actually taught us these immersion classes. We would go to different classes. We had some classes there in Arkansas where people from really all over the country would come for these immersion classes. Dr. Brad Young being the teacher for that class several times. And then we would also have CDs and online studies as well. And so I was able to finish my master's and my doctorate. It took about 5 years after I received the associates to acquire all the the criteria that I needed to be conferred with these doctorates. But in the meantime, I connected to so many different scholars on so many different levels, and we Dr. Brad Young, Dr. John Garr, Dr. Richard Booker became just really, really close friends of both Paul and myself. And we just gleaned from them in so many ways. And so when we started the fellowship here, we wanted to have, really, I guess you call them adjunct professors that would be a part of what we do here. And of course, we also are. I keep up my licensing through Dr. John Garr and Hebraic Heritage Christian community. And the reason is because when Dr. Bean passed away, the Center for the Study of Hebraic Studies, where I got my doctorate, the school kind of just dissipated, but all of his students became grandfathered into Hebraic Heritage College, and so Dr. Garr became that overseer of our licensing and our credentials of that class. So so we're connected in so many different ways, but these are our adjunct professors. This is why we have such great teachers here. I mean, this connection that we have to these scholars runs really deep.
I've noticed. I was here one Shabbat when Dr. John Garr spoke. It was absolutely excellent.
Yeah, for a very small little group that we have here, you're getting education, at least scholarly, deep education that you really can't get in a lot of places. So we're really blessed in that regard.
Now, you mentioned the Nathaniel Center as an entity that helps support and connects you to various Hebraic organizations, but you also do things with regard to the arts.
Right.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, let me clarify that a little bit. Here's the Bethany Center. This is a educational center.
Right.
In Houston, we have the Nathaniel Center, which is a performing arts center.
Okay.
It houses, well, it doesn't anymore. It's a project of the Nathaniel Foundation. So just to be clear, there's the Nathaniel Center, which is a performing arts center, and it has offices in it, different ministries that actually operate out of there, and it's a venue for weddings, bar mitzvahs, whatever party. But it's a project of the Nathaniel Foundation, which the Bethany Center here is also a project of the Nathaniel Foundation. The book I wrote is a project of the Nathaniel Foundation. All of the different aspects of our ministry contributions and support come from the foundation as well. So the foundation has an oversight of where do we place these grants and what projects do we support financially. And the Nathaniel Center is one of them. So yes, the performing arts is something that we feel is essential because what's out there in our culture to entertain us as Americans? Mostly it's movies, it's the theater, it's ballets or whatever. Well, we want to add to that cultural experience and put in at least good godly values, biblical values in what we give to the public. But we also have organizations that are Christian-based, like Opera Legera, is a light opera, and ran by Chris and Sasha Holloway, who he sung for TBN for many years and has quite a few wonderful CDs out there. Incredible tenor, wonderful voice. And then we also have Curtain Call Cafe, which is a Christian organization ran by Brenda White. She's just an incredible playwright and songwriter, and puts these beautiful plays out there that are all Christ-based and biblically based. We have several other secular, I would call it, but we make sure that what they put out there is not something that will embarrass you have your 7-year-old right next to you and not be embarrassed by it.
Exactly.
So
Very
Center
nice.
Stage does a lot of the secular type plays, and allows children to interview or be
join the
screened.
cast or screened.
Yes.
And yes.
And,
Okay.
and it's a great opportunity, I think, for people to get on the stage and have something clean.
So clearly you were involved in some of the administration, some of the decisions, some of the vision behind that whole project of the Nathaniel Foundation. And do I understand that you've also dabbled yourself in some artistic endeavors?
Okay. Yeah, there was this one time whenever we were actually doing an opera leggera show, and for some reason, Chris and Sasha wanted me to display my voice, which is mediocre, but I was involved in singing in choir or whatever in
Sure.
high school, and I was always involved in plays and drama, and that's a real passion of mine anyway. And so Paul comes and I said, yeah, you just sit out here. I'm going to go backstage. And it was not uncommon for me to go backstage because I'm always involved in what's going on. The curtain opens and there I am singing, and I'm singing opera. And he's like, how did
Mouth
this happen?
open.
Right.
Both of you have your mouth open and for different
Exactly.
reasons.
But Sasha is really a wonderful teacher, and I took some operatic type lessons for her for about 6 months and was able to have that experience under my belt.
Your husband, Paul, hasn't he said about you, she can do whatever she sets her mind to do?
He does say that, but I am pretty stubborn. I guess you would call that a good trait in a way. It makes you have that stick-to-itiveness to keep going.
So, okay, so that is a picture of you have done so many things. You've been involved in so much, and we can sit back. But will you give us a bit of insight now into what it was like to grow up to be you? In particular, what was your family life like early on?
Okay.
So forth.
Well, I didn't come from a privileged family or anything. Neither Paul or I did. We're both basically middle class homes. My dad actually was a master, whatever the top is for plumbing. I think it's master. And he actually worked for a large corporation company in Houston, building hospitals and putting the plumbing in these great big buildings, and he was like the foreman or the person in charge. So, I would say that we had a pretty modest middle class lifestyle. Mom wanted to make sure that she always wanted us to look nice and dress nice. So she worked at a department store in the children's department and would bring home bags and bags of clothing for us. And so we always had really cute dresses. They tried to keep us in gymnastics and tap and ballet and acrobats, and I was in a drill team in high school. So they wanted to keep us involved in different activities, and so I would say it was pretty active lifestyle. We went to church when I was little a lot, and then once I got older, that kind of went away, but I still felt like I wanted to go, and so they would take me to church. But we had a spiritual component to our life. But my dad came from a very I guess you would call it a man-oriented background, and where women just kind of stayed in the kitchen. And so I fought that a lot, the stereotype that he expected me to be, keep my mouth shut because I'm a girl, and I didn't know as much as him, and I respected that in a sense, but I really felt like he was very jealous of anything that I excelled in, and
Isn't that odd?
it is. It's odd. In contrast to Paul, where he was really encouraged by his parents to excel and be, have good grades, and I think it intimidated my dad a lot for me to be successful.
To have those desires, to do things,
and
to be
I
ambitious.
believe that because he had that attitude, it made me even more so, determined to I wanted to show him that
prove him wrong
I'm,
if
I'm
needed.
smart. Just because I'm a girl
Yes.
doesn't mean that I can't do things. And so I was in honors classes, and I was the best dancer in drill team, and well, I don't know if I was the best, but I was one of the best. I was in the
you
top
wanted to
10.
be. You tried
well,
to be.
I would try out for all the different dances, and we had to, and I would make it. So I believe that I excelled in a lot of areas, And my dad would really get onto me, like, well, why are you doing this? Who do you think you are? He would always call me Queen Esther. Who do you think you are, Queen Esther?
But you were given a name Victoria, and there's a Queen Victoria, right? So
that's right. Well, Esther and Victoria are actually the same name. It's
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, Hadassah is Victoria, and Hadassah is also Esther.
Oh,
so
I didn't know that.
Depending on the language, yeah.
Well, so he named his daughter. How did you get the name Victoria?
Well, actually, as a child, I was really called Vicky all my life.
Yes, but your given name
Yeah.
on your birth certificate was
No,
Victoria?
it's actually Vicky
Oh.
on my birth certificate. But as I was going through school, people would call me Victoria, and it kind of stuck on me. And then once I started, I guess, getting more involved in the aspect of writing a book and teaching, Victoria just seemed a little bit more, just a little bit more scholarly, I guess. I don't know. Vicky reminds me of a cheerleader or tomboy up in a tree, or like Vicky and Buffy and Tiffany.
Well,
and Cindy.
I mentioned earlier I like the name Victoria. The reason
Right.
I like it is it reminds me of Queen Victoria, and Queen
Yes.
Victoria was a great supporter of Israel. She had something in her heart. She was reaching, she was looking for more, and she was trying to press boundaries and push the status quo.
Yes.
That's what I see you doing
And
too.
so young too. She was very young when
That's
she
a good
took the
point.
throne. So, yeah, I agree.
Okay. So out of that very, non-encouraging home life, you met Paul at age what?
Well, I was in high school, ninth grade, so I was probably 14 when I first met him.
Wow.
And he was like 16.
You, in your book, you talk about your initial interaction with him and what he said to you. Can you mention that to us?
Goodness. Okay. Well, this is him talking, but he has said, I hate to put words in his mouth, but I know he said these before, so I'm gonna go ahead and repeat them. He said that it was love at first sight with him.
Yes.
When he saw me, he thought, "This is the girl."
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand that at that age how you would know, but apparently he said he knew, and I didn't notice him that way when I first met him. I did find out, though, he was the president of the student council, and he was involved in all these different organizations like Mu Alpha Theta, Science Honorary, and he was on the golf team and even on the football team. And so, and I was on the drill team, so we were very connected to the football team, and so we would often find ourselves seeing each other at games or whatever. And he was in my Spanish class, so I saw him there every day, of school. So, and he would do things like drop his pencil and, where he had to come over and pick it up and say hello, all those little tricks that boys do. And I wasn't that impressed. I already had a boyfriend at the time, so I really wasn't looking for another one. But, he was trying to get my attention, and he eventually did. And he asked for my phone number, and then it, rest is history.
From a very early age, he knew that he wanted to do something.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, right?
Yeah, I could tell, even as a teenager, watching him throughout, high school and seeing how he interacted with all the different, groups. We had a lot of different groups in high school. And he related to every single one of them. And, we had there were fights over the jukebox, as to what kind of music would be played. But he was able to be in the student council president and, having really, and really popular vote for so many different groups. It was amazing that he could connect in so many different ways to different people.
So fast forward so many years, and Paul is recognized for his leadership and so forth. You get married at a very early age, and that story is detailed in the book, and you can go to the book for the detail. It's a fascinating story. But do you see, looking back, that God, was it his mercy? What was God doing in terms of taking you out of your home situation pretty early? You got married young, you began to form a family early. The proof of that has been shown in the fruit that's come out over the years. You've stayed married. You have many children. We'll talk about your children in another segment. But looking back, do you see that what was God doing in bringing you into forming that family so young in life?
Well, I feel like, we make a lot of choices that affect our life. And um, we have to, God takes us where we are, wherever we are, and with whatever choices we have made. And if our heart is to give Him glory and to live according to His purposes, at whatever point that comes, God takes what you have and He uses it for His glory. And I don't recommend everybody or many people being married at an early age. There's a lot of things I missed out on,
Yes.
as a teenager. But then again, maybe it was good, because there are a lot of things that teenagers get involved in that are, that could be very
Exactly.
difficult,
Exactly.
for them to
I'm
handle.
not sure that the biblical model isn't for people to get married a bit
Yeah.
younger.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, obviously, there's this tendency to be attracted, for teenagers to have attractions to one another. It's just that I think our society produces such immature teenagers. We don't really have the means by which to really, I think, educate our children in such a way that they can take that type of responsibility early.
Yes.
And I think there's laws actually prohibiting, that. And there's pros and cons. For us, it worked, but it was very early on that I had such an experience that sent my life in such a trajectory, and Paul as well, that we were connected to God very early, and we gave Him what we had, and He has blessed it. So it's a matter of, I think, each individual person. I mean, some people don't get married until much later in life, and that's right for them, because there are things that I believe if you give your life to the Lord and say, here it is, take it.
Yes.
He's going to guide you in His plans and purposes, and you have to give Him what you got, everything.
The book that you wrote, it's Just a Little Girl. I find this title quite interesting because we've been speaking about all the things you've done. Your husband says she can do anything she sets her mind to, and yet the title is Just a Little Girl. Where does that come from?
Well, there's so many. You can find that title is woven in throughout the whole book in so many different ways.
Beautifully, I might add.
Thank you. But I think when you come right down to it, toward the end of the book, I connect it to Jeremiah, where he says, God says, "Do not say I'm only a child," because Jeremiah is dealing with, what God is asking
Yes.
him to do, and it's overwhelming, and he told Jeremiah from the very beginning, I've chosen you, to do great things and to, do wonderful things in your life. And I will put the words in your mouth, and I'm going to send you to the nations, and I'm going to send you to Israel, and you're going to speak, these words. And it really, it's God's plans and purposes, for Israel and the world, and nations. It has come through the mouth of Jeremiah.
Yes.
And God tells him, "Do not say I'm only a child." And I think part of me, sometimes I feel inadequate. God, I can't do what you're asking me to do. I feel like I'm just a little girl. I'm just a child. And I've said that, from the very beginning when I was 18 years old, when I had this experience, and I'm sure you're going to ask about. I felt like, how in the world can I do what you're wanting me to do?
Yes.
I'm just a kid.
Yes.
But I've always felt, that in my own ability, I'm inadequate. It's only whenever the Lord adds, the Spirit, His ability, His gifts, and His mind and His wisdom, that I'm able to function and do what I have to do. And so I really feel like, I'm just a little girl, and He's the finisher of it.
And I suppose it doesn't help when your father continues to look at you, and you talk about this in the book, that even as you grow up, you do all these amazing things, and your father still can't see you.
He never saw me as an adult. He never saw me as, a person that has had wisdom or ability to think, out. I think that, we have to realize as parents that we raise our children to become adults. And
Yes.
many many parents are not willing to let go of that authority or that position of being a parent, and they just want to keep a child under their
Yes.
thumb. And that's one thing that we had to really realize with our children. We had to love them as we let them go, as they were becoming adults. As they were, every single baby that's born, if they run the full gamut of life, they're going to one day be parents themselves, have a family of their own, and will be doing the very thing that you as a parent are doing. And you've got to come into that revelation of this child that I'm holding will one day be holding their children, and prepare them for adulthood, prepare them to be, wise and have the abilities to function outside of being a kid. And my dad just never saw me past that.
So he never really changed?
There was a point in time just before he passed away that I saw something that I had never seen before. He was in intensive care, and I believe he was just getting his life together, getting his affairs in order.
Yes.
You never really know. You're hoping that a person's going to recover from the recent surgery that they would have and he had. And so we weren't really expecting him to die, although we knew it was a possibility always. But he said something to me. He said, "I guess I was pretty hard on you, baby, wasn't I?"
Oh.
And
Wow.
of course, talking about my childhood and talking about even my teenage years and even last week, and I said, "Yeah, you were. Yeah, you were," because it really fashioned me to be someone that always was trying to prove something.
Yes.
Especially to him. And eventually, probably in whenever I would, how when you have a foundation inside of you, whenever you revert back to I guess you would call it the misunderstood or the misled or the uneducated side of why you feel a certain way.
Yes.
And not seeing it from the position of how this factors in and creates who you are, and how positive this has made you. I would revert back to how I'm just a kid, because my dad considered me just a stupid kid, a dumb kid, and he in fact even called me that when I was younger. He didn't call me that as an adult, but sometimes he would say, "That's the stupidest thing I ever heard," which would remind me again
Right.
of all the things that
Takes you back.
Takes me back to how I can't make decisions, and I'm not as smart as he is. That I'm not going to be able to do things that I think I'm going to do because I think too highly of myself. Basically, is what he was saying. You're just a girl. You're just so. Yeah, I mean, I feel like he came to that point in his life where he realized he was really hard on me, and he said, "But that's how I was raised," and so it wasn't an apology really, but it was a reason. He gave me the reason why he was so hard on me, because his daddy was hard on him. And it made him strong. It made him who he was. And I guess that's all he knew, he said, was to raise his children in the same way he was raised. And that was just this real stern, get up early in the morning. And, he lived on a farm. And a really highly developed work ethic. And he didn't want me staying up late at night because I couldn't get up early. I was staying up late at night doing my homework. And for some reason that was wrong. I don't know, how all this works as far as psychologically, but I did figure out that my dad was telling me I did the best I could, and this is how I was raised, and he was very softened, I think, at that point, and I was able just to kind of breathe and say, it's okay, Dad, it's all right.
Wow. So. I really appreciate you opening up on this point in this interview, and you go into even more detail in the book. It's really helpful to help. You've been so open with your life, and anyway, I think we can all take lessons from this. Thank you for sharing.
You're
When
welcome.
we come back in our next segment, I'd like to ask you about your family and what you've learned from the Lord through them. Well, this is Bob Odell with Root Source, and we are back with Dr. Victoria Sarvadi, but you go by Victoria. And tell us about your family. How many children do you have, for instance?
I have 6 kids and 20 grandkids.
20 grandkids.
I know.
And
I can't even believe it.
And if we delay publishing this video for 3 months, you might,
No,
who knows?
No, I have one daughter that's not married, but all the ones that are married are probably done.
Oh, okay. All right.
So,
Well, that 20 is a nice number. Oh, my goodness.
It's a nice number, but I expect more in a few years.
All right. Well, that's beautiful. You talk about, in your book, Just a Little Girl, you talk about family life. Mm-hmm. It was very important to you and Paul. Mm-hmm. What did that look like? Someone walks in on a family gathering. What are they going to hear? What are they going to say?
We're loud and obnoxious and crazy.
And having fun.
A lot of fun. There's just a lot of interaction, a lot of joy. And I think that everybody, they look forward to these family, get-togethers, whether it's a birthday or a family vacation or whatever it is. I mean, it's very important to all of us, and I think it was instilled, in our children very early on. The kids are very close, especially the daughters. They're very close to each other, and I guess it's just it's a part of who we are, and it's our mindset, how we live.
Speaking of grandkids, you say in the book that the cover photo, of course it's you, but this is one of your grandkids, isn't it?
That's Ashton. She's probably about 7 years old there, and she's actually wearing the dress that I had on in the mirror image. And
that's amazing.
Yeah,
and she looks so much like you from the back.
Yeah, she does.
Beautiful. One of the stories that you talk about in the book, because you're telling the story of your life, and there's a period in which things are starting to move. You can see, the business with Paul is going well. You buy a piece of property outside of, is this in Kingsland, outside of Houston?
Yeah, outside of Kingwood.
Kingwood, excuse me. So you buy a piece of property, you've got a large house on it, a lot of acreage, and Paul does the calculations and say, you know what, rather than hiring a landscaping company to take care of all this, why don't I do this, and I'll hire people directly and get some younger teenagers to come in and do it for a lot less.
Well, it was more than that. We had a building on the property in the back. It was like, it used to, the people who owned the property before raised and bred horses. And they had this beautiful barn back there, 6,000 square foot barn, tack room and all that. And so we didn't have horses, and so we thought, well, this is really a nice little, building back here. Let's make it into some apartments for, because we had a lady that was actually the nanny for our children, and we wanted to give her an apartment back there, and maybe somebody else that might, would be also, serving in some capacity to help us in our raising of our huge family. And then, of course, we want to have just a rec room and things of that nature, storage. And so we built out this barn to a 6,000 square foot, facility. And we had 2 apartments up on the upper floor, and so we were the youth leaders of our congregation at the time.
Right.
So we had a lot of young people were coming over, and some were done with high school, but they didn't want to leave us. So we had college kids there as well, and so some of those guys were saying, can we move out into the apartment and work for you? And discussing it with Paul, he agreed that might be a great idea, and then we'd have them right on the spot there, and they could live there and work.
Huh. You have a family of mostly daughters.
Yes.
You have some young men coming out, and did any sparks fly?
Oh yeah, we actually had 2 of those. I mean, there were like 4 different guys that actually lived out in those apartments from one time or another. And out of the 4, 2 of them married 2 of our daughters.
Wow.
So yeah, there was definitely some sparks flying.
Wow. One of those son-in-laws that you have has a very important role today. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Paul says we did more than just, raise, children and raise, plants, and because we had quite a few things that we did on the property, because we actually raised son-in-laws in our backyard.
Very
so
nice.
so one of them, John Paul Barkley, he is actually the son of what was our senior pastor at the time of the Hebraic congregation we were attending, and I was the associate minister for education there. And
Pastor Braun
Barkley, yes. And he was actually our pastor when we first moved to the Kingwood area, and when we were transitioning churches back when we were going to the regular denominational type churches, and he was the pastor of an Assembly of God church. And so we started going there before we all felt the calling of going back to our Hebraic roots. But so Pastor Barkley, or Braun, they were covenant friends, he and Darlene, and so his sons were very close to us in a lot of ways. And John Paul was in our youth group, and so when he and Kristen got married, we kept him on the payroll. And he's been on it ever since. He's in fact in another office next door to us. He still works for us, and this was,
So what does he do today?
Okay, today he is our executive director of our foundation.
Nice.
And whenever we lived in the Kingwood area, he also was the facilities manager and then the general manager of the Nathaniel Center, which was the Performing Arts Center. And so he works with the foundation. He worked with the center. Now he's here at the Bethany Center. And he does all of our social media and our marketing for our ministry here.
Okay.
So, yes.
Very nice.
He does both capacity, the foundation work and the Bethany Center work. No longer doing the performing arts stuff. He's moved on from there.
All right.
But always, I really feel like he is he feels like he's my own. I've known him since he was 10 years old. And so John Paul is very close to my heart. He feels like one of my own.
That's beautiful. So all of your children are biological children?
No.
Tell us.
Well, I have 4 biological daughters. I have one son that is in heaven, and I guess we'll be talking about him a little bit later.
Next segment.
Okay. And then we adopted a boy and a girl, and but I don't consider them any different. I was adopted as well, and I wouldn't say, oh, here are my biological children. Oh, these are my 2 adopted children. To me, in my mind, they are. I never differentiate them, and when I introduce them or talk about them.
I think the angle on this story that I think is interesting is that you have a lot going on in your life. You had a career, you had a lot of activities. Paul had this business that he's trying to grow, and you find time to adopt children. Tell us how that happened.
Well, I really felt like when I was in prayer one day, God put it in my heart to start praying for this young boy that really needed to be rescued. And you just call it by the Spirit or whatever. And so I started praying for him.
And just out of the blue, one day you're praying at home, and then
I consider myself, especially at this time, a real strong intercessor. And when I felt the unction by the Spirit to pray for certain people, sometimes I felt like I'm praying for somebody in another country, or you never know what you're praying for, especially if you're praying by the Spirit and not in your own understanding. And so, but as I started praying and really feeling a groaning and a desire to help God rescue this child from whatever abusive situation that he was in. And I don't know, I felt connected in such an intimate kind of way. It just didn't let go of me. And then I began to realize that this child may have something to do with my life, and maybe one day would be a part of it. And so, and that was in 1987, and that's the year he was conceived and born. And so,
So you're praying in 1987, and you have this sense about there's a boy. But nothing happens right away.
No.
Right?
No, but I never went away.
Right. Okay.
Right. I mean, there was this desire to help him. And my husband was on the board for DePelchin Children's Services, which is one of the largest children's services in Houston. It is the largest. and they help children who are displaced from their homes and put them in foster care, or they also have an adoption program, and also all kinds of educational classes for parenting and things of this nature. And so he was on the board, and we began to see how many kids there were out there that really needed families, needed homes, and a lot of them were hard to place. And so we felt like that this was somehow connected to what we were praying for. And we began the process of the home studies to be approved for adopting a child.
Wow. Okay. But that took a while.
Took
that
a
was
while.
Okay.
Right.
So, so did you end up adopting this boy?
Yes, we did. But in the meantime, while we were in the middle of the home study, an opportunity came up for us to adopt a newborn little girl. And we were already in the process, and it was like, this is easy. Of course, we're going to do this. And so she was easily placed into our home. And we were still in the process for the special needs boy. And it was at the when we appeared before the judge to finalize her adoption that we were approached by the caseworker that said, I've got a little boy that I think he's supposed to be in your home. And
she said that?
Yeah.
I think
she absolutely said that.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And we were kind of taken back by it. Here we are, it has a brand new baby in our arms, and just trying to. We were just relishing, and basking in this beautiful child that's now ours, and then we're hit with this idea of adopting another one, and this one being 4.5, and but we both felt it. We felt it. This is the one.
That's the one.
Yeah.
You thought you went back to that original prayer
Exactly.
time in your mind, and
Mm-hmm.
you knew.
Yep.
Wow.
And we took him. We were going on our family vacation, in the next few weeks, and so we asked. They wanted to do a home visit and have him. We visited him, and then they wanted him to visit us, which we did. And then after we did that, the 2 visits, we said, "Look, we're about to go to Bermuda for a family vacation. Can we take him?" And so scrambling around getting him a passport, and they said, yes, go ahead and take him. This would be great. This might be a time for you really to connect to him. And oh my gosh, he was a handful. But we pretty much knew even before we took him that he was ours.
Isn't that interesting that, and you, by the way, you tell some funny stories in the book about the things that happened on that initial vacation, and you talk about what it was like with Wes, who's become so dear, so precious to you. The fact that you knew years before that this was the one, did that help you
Mm-hmm.
during the process? Because this wasn't so easy.
It wasn't easy. Wes has had to overcome a lot and still is in the process of overcoming. And I believe will be victorious to just get beyond a lot of his own demons that he's had to deal with
Right.
over his life. And whenever your foundational time period, time from your birth until age 4, it really sets you up for life as to how you think and how you react and what you think of yourself and your self-image. It creates that, and your value system. And to strip that apart, because it was a lack of values. It was a very low self-esteem. It was a very victimized little boy that we received into our family.
Yes.
And it comes with a lot of hurt and a lot of pain and a lot of misunderstanding and lashing out and acting out. And so we really had to. We relied on the fact that God really put this in our heart very early on, and that this was something that was His will, and so we persevered through a lot of it.
I'm sure you could answer this question 10 ways, but could you give one way in which you felt like God used this experience to teach you something important?
It shows me that we're just like this unruly child that comes into the family.
Wow.
And how He pursued us, that he loved us, and he brought us in.
Wow.
And grafted us into this adoptive, family.
Wow.
And there's no difference between those who were biologically connected to this cultivated olive tree and those who were brought in. We just have to learn his ways. Wes has struggled to learn the ways of our family and of God, biblical understanding, what is valuable in life, and who he is, changing his self-image and the connection of who his family is. And I think we all come in with our own idea of who we are, and God has to do some changes in us to help us learn of who he is and learn his ways, and leave a lot of our own preconceived ideas of God, our preconceived ideas of our new family.
Yes.
And leave all that behind and receive and understand him in this new light.
That is a wonderful point, and that's exactly the point I want to transition to, because there was one more story among many, but one I wanted to touch on. You went through a protracted period of health difficulty that ended up in you coming to Dallas. Would you give us a sense of what that was, what you learned in it, and how God took you through it?
Yeah, I alluded to this a while ago, where I was so involved in ministry. And I think that, if you want, it's just the old adage, if you want something done, give it to a busy person, right? And so I could never say no to anything. And I think that as you begin to see that there are needs in a ministry, you kind of take it on yourself to do it. And eventually you might find somebody to take over for you. But I did everything, I was like I said, I was the minister for our education department. I was teaching 3 different classes. I was working on my doctorate. I had a class that basically was a part of my dissertation, and I had to create a curriculum, and so the curriculum was the dissertation. And I was also involved in the foundation. I was on 3 very active boards. I can't even tell you all the different things. I mean, my children, volleyball and basketball and soccer and all the things that they were doing, it was a part of my life too. And I had a husband, I had a dad living at home, just fixing dinner was sometimes very, very difficult. I'd stay at the office sometimes till 11 o'clock at night doing things. And so, I was burning the candle at both ends, and really just became so burned out on everything. And then I was hitting that age where, I was hitting that menopausal age, which absolutely just drains you. You don't have any energy. You're in a chemical and hormonal imbalance, and it's not something that I wish I could have put my finger on it and pushed the button and say I'm fixing this chemical problem. But at first you don't even know what it is.
Right.
You just know that you're mad, and and you don't know why, and you get frustrated, and you're thinking, this isn't like me. So eventually you start figuring it out. I must be having some type of hormonal crisis, but you don't know at first. I looked in the mirror one day, and I just looked in my eyes. I said, do I have a demon? Why am I so mean? I just didn't know, what was the frustration? Where was it coming from? And so then I started having physical issues as well, just heart issues where, it's the numbing in the arm, going to the doctor saying, no, your heart's fine, but, what else is going on in your life? And, I had Lyme's disease. I was bit by a tick. And so that was contributing all kinds of more issues on compounding with what I was dealing with. And I was able to rid myself of Lyme's by following a very natural regimen and stopping the sugar intake, which really just squeezes the life out of these things.
Okay.
It starves them. And then that's hard too, because now you have these dietary restrictions. So I was done. When I finished the dissertation, I had another health issue that came up. I had an ovarian cyst at the same time. And I said, I'm crashing and I'm diving. I don't have anything left in me. It's like whenever you burn the candles at both ends, your immune system comes down,
Yes.
and everything is affected.
Yes.
You're so vulnerable to so many different things. And so the doctor told me, my cardiologist, she said, "Do you want to live?" She says, "You just told me all of these different stressors, like 20 different stressors, any one of which could have, actually, caused a person to have a, nervous breakdown. But you are living through all this." And she says, "If you want to live, you need to take these stressors away, at least for a while." So I decided to replace myself in a lot of different capacities there in the Houston area, and come up here to Dallas and breathe and try to get my health back, and find my compass again.
Yes.
As to what God wanted me to do, and stop saying yes to everything. And actually he took me here for a lot of different reasons, and one was to redirect the path I was going on. Not that the path that I was on was wrong, but it wasn't
Right.
the right path for me.
Yes.
And so when I came up here, I just wanted to breathe. And what I found was this love and acceptance that I got from my grandchildren, and my happy place, when this is what I call it. And my daughter Kristen and John Paul just recently had their first baby, and Joshua was born. And for some reason, I just latched onto that baby, and he became like my own. And whenever I felt a little bit upset, I'd just go visit Josh and play with him, get on the floor. We'd make forts and tents, and we had the giant squid on the other side, and then there's we just pretended. And it was amazing, the healing that came as I just got on the floor and played with my little grandson.
I find that story beautiful because, even in America, we're so focused on what we do, and we get our legitimacy from accomplishing things and so forth. And here God squeezed you into a place where you needed to let go, and you found your recovery and healing through something as simple as being with family.
That's exactly right. And it refocused me. It made me realize why I'm doing the things I'm doing. Sometimes we get so busy that we neglect those family members that really need our time and attention, and our ministry as well.
Yes.
And I felt like my youngest daughter probably suffered the most because I was so involved in ministry. And just now we are really connecting on a spiritual level that we've never connected on before.
Wow.
And I think
Wow.
that she had to go and find her own way, but now we've connected back, and it's just a blessing to be a part of Brittany's life.
Wow. Wow. Well, I think this is a really important story, and I really appreciate your openness to it. I think we're going to come back, and in the next segment, we're going to talk about that thing that ties it all together.
Okay.
So we'll look forward to that. So stay with us, and until we return, this is Bob Odell from Root Source saying Shalom. Well, this is Bob Odell with Root Source, and we are back with Victoria Sarvadi. We've talked about your business and the Bethany Center. We've talked about your drive. We've talked about your family and the lessons that God has taught you through that. But there's been something that has been left out. If we were to stop here, we would be missing out on the thread that ties it all together. Because you have been having a private conversation with God your entire life. Tell us about that.
Well, I've always been what I consider a spiritual person. There were times whenever I felt like there were just angelic presence, either seen or unseen, in my life as a child. And just a desire to know God and to have this relationship with Him. I feel like, though, whenever I was in 8th grade, it was really concrete. It really became real important to me. I was in Lutheran catechism, class, getting ready for my first confirmation, and I was just listening to the pastor, and I remember telling my parents. They stopped going to church after a while when I was like in maybe middle school, and I said, but I feel like I really need to go. And they said, well, we want you to be confirmed, and so I was going on my own to church on Sunday, and I was taking my allowance, and I was giving 25% of that to the church. Wasn't that much? I only got $2 back in 1971 or whatever it was, but it was important to me because I really felt like that relationship with God was essential in my life. And when I was in catechism class, the pastor started teaching us students about the importance of saved by grace through faith, which is really the whole, I believe, the foundation of Lutheranism.
Okay.
The revelation of Martin Luther, that it's not of
Sure,
our works,
sure.
right? And so as I was listening to the pastor explain this really critical aspect of our faith, I felt like he was just talking to me. And I began to feel a connection to his words, and I became emotional. And while the other kids were, doing their homework and playing paper football or whatever the boys did, I was weeping. And he asked his wife to take me out to the hallway and find out if I was okay. And I just said, I just want to be what God wants me to be. What he was saying is so important. I mean, it's not anything that I'm doing, that he loves me. And I just want him to be that daughter, that person that he wants me to be. I just don't know how to do it. And so she didn't know how to minister to me at all. She kept asking me if things were okay at home, at school, and you're missing the point. What he said was important. Well, what did he say? So it was one of those things. And so I went home, and I really felt like I wanted to say something. So I found in my little jewelry box a Jesus freak pin. I got from Spencer Gifts. Okay, it was psychedelic, and I wore that to school the next day, and I was telling everybody, about this experience that I had that night before in church, and I was crying, and they were just looking at me like, you're weird, what's going on? But there was this one boy in my science class that said, sounds like you might have got saved. And being that I was from a Lutheran background, I didn't understand that I was even lost. And so I said, what do you mean? So we had to cut our conversation short due to the teacher telling us to. And so we met afterwards, and after school, and he began to talk to me and disciple me for at least about a week, I think. But I really lost that discipleship, aspect in my life. That initial first love that was there was real. I could feel it. I knew it. But there wasn't anybody there to take the reins, and it really wasn't Ricky's responsibility, although he did I asked a lot of questions, and he was able to answer from his Baptist background, many things that I was asking. But anyway, just as with a lot of Christians, that first love kind of grows cold, even though it was still there. I still felt it, but not to the degree I had it before until I was 18. And by this time now, I'm married.
You're married?
Yeah, and I'm pregnant with my second baby already. And I was almost 19. I was just 2 months from being 19. But I think it's significant that I was 18, being that is the number of life.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Very nice.
And so I just remember, knowing that this experience that I had set me up for life. And
what happened when you were 18 is what you're talking about?
Yes,
set you up for life. Okay.
Set me up for life. And to this day still is the whole crux of why I am, who I am, and what I do.
Wow, so we've learned all this about you, and now we're about to understand something that's at a deeper level, even deeper than your interaction with your father, your interaction with your husband, your interaction with the kids,
Right.
something deeper.
Right. So I was pregnant with my second baby. First baby, was, as far as the delivery was concerned, was quite, easy. I had a cesarean section. They closed the doors. 15 minutes later, the baby's there. And so I was very sick with this second baby. I started having health issues, sleeping a lot, eventually becoming jaundice, and the doctors were concerned, even though they wanted me to go full term because the baby seemed to be very immature at the time. And so trying to hold on as much time as we could, letting the baby stay in utero without jeopardizing my health because I was declining quite quickly. But anyway, so I went into the doctor for I guess you would call it a regular visit, and I was already a couple days past due. And he took one look at me and he says, we need to get her to the hospital stat. I was already, showing signs of jaundice. I couldn't even lift my head up off the table. I had to be helped, to
Okay.
move everywhere. So after I got into the hospital, I don't remember anything. Apparently I slipped into, a comatose type situation, and I just don't have memory at all. Paul said that I began to respond to pain on a regular basis, cyclical basis. It sounded like I was in labor. So they took me in, they delivered the baby, and I never regained consciousness, at least not at that hospital. The baby was born, yes, immature, 3 pounds, 14 ounces, but full term, and seemed to have some type of issues with his lungs. They had a hard time keeping him without being on the breathing machine. And eventually they realized that the baby wasn't going to make it, and they told Paul that they expected him to pass away. And he did an hour later. And so Paul wanted to tell me about it. And I was still in recovery. And that was in the morning. And by that night, 7 o'clock that night, I'm still in recovery, not waking up from the anesthesia. And so now I'm starting to have multiple organ failure, and the doctors were very concerned. They said we need to get her out of this community hospital and take her down to the Med Center in Houston, where they can keep her alive with various different machines. Liver was failing, kidneys were failing. My blood work, my blood wasn't coagulating, so I was bleeding really badly. So anyway, they were prepping me to go down to the Med Center. And I remember when I was in recovery, there was a time where I thought I woke up and talked to Paul. He kept telling me that the baby had passed away. If you can hear me, squeeze my hand. And I thought I was squeezing his hand, but he said I never did. Then I heard my pastor. Then I actually didn't hear. I saw my pastor, but Paul said I never opened my eyes. I saw my pastor reciting the 23rd Psalm over me. And, being, from the Lutheran faith, that is a psalm that you say at funerals. And
yes.
I'm like,
yes.
Who's dying? Is it me? Am
yes.
I dying? And so I was kind of taking in all this information. And then I saw a lady at the foot of my bed crying, a nurse.
Yes.
And I thought, who is she? Why is she crying? And, Paul was right next to me, by my face, and he's talking to me. He was getting really close, and I was trying to communicate, but I never did. Well, come to find out later that whenever I explained what I saw to Paul, he said, that happened, but you never opened your eyes. You were completely, out of it. And he says, but you described the room perfectly, and that lady at the very end was the nurse that baptized our son.
Wow.
Being that we were from the Lutheran faith, it was on my little bracelet. She was also a Lutheran. Lutherans believe that the baby needs to be baptized before it dies. And that was the key issue, by the way, that made us start seeking. Because I asked our pastor, I said, do you really think that, this child not being baptized would cause him, not being able to be entering into the presence of God? And he said, that's kind of what our tenets of our faith teach. And I said, do you believe that? He goes, well, no, not really. And so I thought, there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
And so we began to seek out, answers. But in the meantime, they prepped me to go into the ambulance, and then I had a brief awakening and what I thought being conscious was, but apparently I never gained consciousness in the ambulance. I remember seeing at the inside of the ambulance a very handsome EMT working on me. I remember his eyes, they were blue. I'm looking right at him. I'm seeing him. He's right in front of me. I see his face, and very young, and I see all the orange and the emergency lights, and there was sort of a blue hue. Anyway, I saw that. I remember it. And then again, the big revelation or experience was whenever I was in intensive care. there at Methodist Hospital in Houston. And after the doctor just told Paul that we don't expect her to make it through the night, apparently I coded. And I had an experience that has forever changed my life. I felt myself falling through now I'm going to be using language here that doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the natural, because it was a spiritual experience.
Okay.
We are all spirit, and when we die, our spirit moves and goes somewhere, and it takes along with it our ability to think, our memories, our emotions, our thoughts, our personality. What makes us us and how we respond. All the foundational values that you have is your soul. And so with my spirit, my soul also was carried. So I felt my body dying. I knew that it was dying. I even said it to myself, "You're dying. We're dying." And so I felt myself falling through what I call my own personal universe. It was like my own cosmos. It was like a congruent lines of time and space. But as I fell through it, I knew that it was time that I have not yet experienced yet. It's like I was going through what would be. A lot of people say their past flies before their eyes, passes before their eyes when they die. It wasn't my past at all. God wasn't judging me for my past. It wasn't time for me to come before his presence in that way. But I was having to travel through time, I guess you would say, or what would be time. And as I was going through this cosmos, I saw on these different congruent lines experiences that brought forth treasures and revelation. It was all spiritual. Everything had to do with spiritual revelation and wisdom. The Bible calls it chokhmah and bina, wisdom and understanding. And it was very, very powerful and very, very important, like precious stones. Like the most valuable thing in the world was the wisdom of God that was prepared for me along the way. And I was going through Mach speed, through my cosmos, through my timeline, and I couldn't stop and pick up and understand what was rightfully mine. I knew these were my gifts. I knew these were things that were made for me, and it was part of who I was going to be. But I was going so fast through this time continuum, or I guess you'd call it, that I couldn't stop and get what I knew was mine. And there was a light, and I tunneled through it. And by the way, as I got toward the end of the light, there was a whole lot of what I would call treasure at the end of that.
Oh, interesting.
And then I passed through into the light, and instead of being in the presence, I was in the presence, but I was shocked to see that I was in the ICU room at Methodist Hospital.
Wow.
Bright lights, and I was above my body looking down. Seemed to be tethered to my body by a cord that I couldn't see, but I couldn't move any further away from it. And to my right was an entity clothed in light. I knew it was an angel. In fact, I called the angel by his name. And I knew this angel has been with me all my life. And
in the spirit, you knew the name of the angel,
apparently,
even though you hadn't voiced that name
not
before.
Not consciously, but apparently, maybe in a subconscious way, in my sleep, or in a place where we don't really know we're communicating. Angels, are messengers from God, and they minister to us. They go before the throne of God, and they I know they're laying hands on us. They're speaking to us, and so I believe
they're laying hands on us.
I believe
really
that they're
interesting.
Touching us.
They can. Wow.
I believe that they're touching us,
Huh.
and that's why we can feel sometimes the presence of something otherworldly around us. Is that we're connecting somehow with the angelic, or even that of the spirit, the angel of the Lord, which is Christ Himself, God Himself.
Right.
That comes. And we see instances of that in Scripture all the time, where the angel of the Lord, appeared to Abraham in several instances on Mount Moriah, and then whenever, in the situation with Lot. So, I saw him, and I knew him, and I called him by his name, and I told him, I said, where I want to go see my baby. Now you got to remember, I have not come to consciousness yet in the natural.
Right.
But when I was in the spirit, I knew that the baby had passed away.
Oh, okay.
And so that's the first thing I asked the angel, where's my son? I want to go see him.
And you knew the baby, well, you already knew that your baby was a son from like
Apparently, I
sonograms
did.
or
No.
no, this was in the spirit that you knew.
Yeah,
Okay,
I did
wow.
not. I did not know
Okay.
it was a son, but I remember asking him about a son, and so he says, "Your child is on the lap of the Father." That was his answer to
Whoa.
me, and he says, "But you are going to go back." And I'm looking down at this body, and it is diseased. It is yellow with jaundice, edema. You know, I didn't even look like myself. I didn't recognize the person
Oh
laying
my
there at all.
goodness.
And I said, I don't want to go back in there. I remember how painful it was. I know how I was struggling to, just maintain breath and life. And he says, no, he says, you're going to go back and you're going to go through life in real time, all the things that you saw on your way here through that cosmos.
Wow.
All those things that you saw, you're going to go through in real time and acquire all of these gifts and promises, because they are irrevocable. This is what God has planned for your life, and you're going to receive all of that.
Is this how you would interpret that a verse that says the gifts and callings of God are irrevocable?
Yes,
Okay.
I absolutely feel that. I mean, he had called me to understand. He was pouring into me his knowledge. I believe that God, he desires to pour into us wisdom. But it's not wisdom as we understand it. What we understand in Hebrew is called da'at. It's knowledge. It's things that we get through study or observation or experimentation, being taught. But wisdom is divinely imparted.
Wow.
It is a supernatural event that God gives us wisdom that's beyond what we understand. And this is what his plan for me was, to receive this chokmah of God, and the bina, which is the understanding that only comes by the discerning of the Spirit. It's not by our own understanding. It is a divine impartation. And so all of these things that I saw along the way, this is what adds value to your life. It says that we go through a refining fire when we stand before the Lord, and everything that's of the flesh is burned up, and all that remains is that which is pure. And so what I saw along the way was the purity, the wisdom that God wanted to instill into me, to pour into me. And, what I saw was all the beauty, of what God wants to do in my life. And
you're 18, you see all these things.
You
have no idea what it is.
No, I was but while I was in the Spirit, it's like I did understand.
Yes.
But when I came back, I couldn't voice it. I didn't understand what I really saw. I knew the essence of it.
Yes.
And that eventually I would know it, because he says you're to go back and you're going to go through real time, and you're going to receive all these gifts and promises that are irrevocably yours.
Yes.
And you are going to teach others. So as God pours into me, I was to, give it back out. And when you're 18, you're going, right, I'm just a little girl. And I don't know a whole lot about the Bible, a little bit, but not a whole lot.
But you knew it would be spiritual wisdom somehow in your spirit.
And so in time it would happen.
Yes.
And so I just kind of rested in that. Whenever you have a spiritual experience like that, I kind of think about what the Virgin Mary, when she was told that she was going to conceive a child.
Right.
She says, be it as it is, as your word is said.
Right.
And then it says that she pondered these words in her heart. And that's what I pretty much did. I'm hearing words that don't make a whole lot of sense to me in the natural, especially at that time in my life. But I knew that one day they would. So I pondered them, I kept them, I guarded them, and waited for when God was going to do something like that. And it really didn't really happen until the late 90s. And so that was the late 70s.
Wow.
So it was, 20 years.
Your spiritual journey took you through different denominations and so forth. Can you help us?
Yes. Okay. Obviously, the baptism issue was the first thing on our heart. We just wanted to understand why this infant baptism was so important.
Yeah, because you knew that your child was on the Father's lap. So
yeah.
Why is it being questioned?
Yeah, and it's definitely a doctrine of man. and again, trying to seek out these answers. So we thought, hey, our friends who are Baptist, hey, the Baptists should know about baptism. That was our
There you
logic.
go. Okay.
So we started going to the Baptist church, and remember, we were from high liturgical churches, Catholic and Lutheran churches, and so we understood, the reverence of God. We understood the formalities of liturgy. And so we started going to a Baptist church, and it was very casual, and people were reading Bibles, and we thought, you read the Bible? This is not something we do, is it? Yeah, no, this is for the pastor or the priest. No, this is what you can do. So the encouragement to go into Bible studies and learn the Word of God and actually practice it and understand what a testimony was and your experience, your salvation experience. This was all new to us. And this is what we grasped and understood from our Baptist experience, and it was so rich. It was a whole nother level from a high liturgical, going through these very ritualistic motions, which I think in a way show a lot of reverence. Mm-hmm. The Baptists really, in our experience, didn't show as much reverence, and so we were kind of like shocked by, where's the reverence? but what we gained and learned from it was a huge gem, a wonderful understanding. And then as I was reading the Bible and going to Bible studies, now I'm hearing about the Holy Spirit. And so I'm going, well, what is this? And our pastors, our teachers would say, oh, stay away from that. That's not part of the dispensation today. What's that mean? And so, I felt like if it was in the Bible, it was for today. Because my God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So I started sneaking away to Women's Aglow meetings, and finding the baptism, the Holy Spirit, and the need for the Spirit in our life,
yes.
And not just to go through the motions by the flesh, but to really allow the Spirit of God to move and the gifts to move. And whenever you pray for somebody, just healing and the power of God, whether it's through another prayer language or whatever. I just open myself up and say, God, just come in and use me. And so from there, Paul also eventually received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. We started going to a charismatic church. And then I started asking questions about, well, what are these, here I'm a teacher now. I'm teaching now.
Yes.
He's an elder in the church. And I said, what are these things in Leviticus 23 about the feast of the Lord? I'll stay away from that. That's for the Jews. And I'm like, no, it's in our Bible. When does part of the Bible not include us? So at that time we were moving to Kingwood, and our pastor, Dr. Barkley, said that they were having a Messianic rabbi come in to do a Passover dinner, and I thought, oh, this is it. This is the answer to that question, and the rest is history. We began, of course, our connection with Dr. Booker, and so on and so forth, and we kind of pick up where I started, connecting us to all the Hebraic scholars, and then eventually the education that brought me to where I am today. So,
isn't that beautiful? And so this drive to not accept the status quo was birthed in you by the Lord through an experience where you got to see treasure mm-hmm. that you might gain over the course of your life.
Exactly.
I think that is an amazing invitation mm-hmm. that God created. He put an invitation in front of you. Don't settle. Go for it. And here you are.
Well, I think he also took away I don't know if you call it dogma or superiority in the fact that, well, I'm a Lutheran and
yes.
if you don't believe like I do, then I'm not going to associate with you. Or I'm a Baptist and everybody else is wrong, only I'm right. And then, going into the charismatic gifts, saying, thinking that things have to be a certain way. And, assume, Jesus even said, to the one who says, didn't I cast out demons in your name? Because I never knew you. Yeah. So there was something more than just the charismatic gifts. There was something more than just your baptism. What is it, Lord? Show me.
And this dogma comment is fascinating and I think really important. I just want to highlight to make sure I've got this. It's not that God said, I'm going to put you on a journey for wisdom, and I'm going to take you to the place of ultimate wisdom to where you'll be the in person with the insight. But on the process, you began to open your heart and say, you know what, there's more out there. Not just there's more that I search, but I'm not going to disparage mm-hmm. those
No.
along the way who aren't on this particular journey.
You have to have an omniscient perspective of it, and the only way to do that is to allow the Spirit of God to show you some things.
Yes.
Where I was coming from was very narrow. Coming from, I learned so much with the different denominations along the way. I call them precious gems. I learned the importance of reverence in the Lutheran Church. I learned the importance of my testimony and my salvation in the Baptist Church. I learned the importance of the gifts of the Spirit and the power of the walking in the Spirit and not in the flesh. And then when I came to this revelation of the first century, all of those things of the denominational, revelations.
Yes.
He brought me to a point to the Genesis before there was a need to have all the fragments. In the very beginning, that first century was Judaism. It was Jesus's Judaism. It was like he validated the entire scriptures because he said all of it was about him.
Yes.
And everything that Moses talked about, Moses spoke about him. So everything in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, throughout the prophets and the writings of the Psalms and the Proverbs has to do with Messiah, has to do with who he is. And that's all he used, of course, in the first century. There was no Second Testament. It was just the scriptures. And so everything that's in the scriptures of the Tanakh, which is the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, has to do with Messiah. And I think I began to realize that from this vantage point, I can't look through the telescope at the wrong end. We have to put ourselves back in that first century understanding of who Jesus was, who Yeshua was, what his life looked like, what his faith looked like, what he was saying when he said it, what did the people around him understand and hear, what did they hang it on, instead of looking at it through Greco-Roman eyes, like I said, the wrong side of the telescope, looking backwards. We have such a limited view. When we started the first century, then we began to see how it became so fragmented in all these different directions.
Yes.
33 different thousands Christian denominations.
Yeah.
We go back to the first century where it was a sect of Judaism where Messiah, Yeshua, filled in the blank as to who and what the Tanakh has been talking about. It's all about me, he said. The things in the Torah, it was written about me. And so when I began to realize that he's the living Torah and that the written Torah is the blueprint, all of a sudden I got such a love for the Torah. I had a love for the Tanakh. I had a love for the prophecies. And as Christians understand the Messiah, filling in the blank, many people began to realize and put value and validation in the First Testament that we call the Old Testament. It becomes a valid book. Jesus validated it. And so this is where, we come from. We go back to that first century. We take into account the time of Yeshua and what he was saying and what his faith looked like, and we implement that. And, I have to appreciate everyone from every different denomination because I was, a part of all those different things, and I found the beauty in each one. But I think a lot of people are wanting to go back to that original Genesis of the faith and see Yeshua from that standpoint, from the light of the Torah. And that's why I think that it's so important for us to connect to a lot of the Jewish teachers. What do they see in the Torah? And whenever I hear one of the Jewish rabbis talk, I see it through the lens of Messiah.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
And I'm able to connect on that level. So I think what happens is you at least what God's done in me, he's taken away that superiority and that dogma that says you got to think just like I do. Because when I was a Lutheran, I was still me. When I was a Baptist, I was still me. Would I reject myself now to look at myself back then? I don't think so. It's a process that we all go through.
That's nice.
And everybody's at different points.
I appreciate there's one of the theme statements of the Bethany Center, as I've heard it said, is that in the Bethany Center you're interested not just in faith in Jesus, but in the faith of Jesus, of Yeshua. And I think that's a really interesting way to describe this this journey. So, as far as you know, is this the destination that was being prophesied to you? Is what you're in where God had you to end up all along? Do you think that there might be some other dimensions that might come later? Do you have any idea on that?
Well, it's life. This is all a process, right? I mean, as we get closer and closer to
Yes.
The end of our purpose, and what Yeshua wants to accomplish with us, and He has a purpose, of course, for the culmination of the kingdom. So, could there be more? Oh yeah, there could be a lot more revelation. The connection that we're seeing right now is greater than the beginning when we first started the Hebraic,
Yes.
process of relearning the ways of God, and so it's becoming more and more. I don't want to call it complicated, but it's becoming. There's a lot of layers now that we can see. It's complex. There's more complexity to it. We see end time type scenarios that we're looking at. We see how there will be a peace treaty that many of the Jewish community will accept and be deceived by. We see the Christian community following government and politics and thinking that there's an answer in governmental leaders.
Right.
And of course there's going to be a leader that's going to have a treaty that's going to be a world leader, and there's going to be a prophet and so we see deception happening all over, and we feel like it's very important that we be really close to the Spirit of God to help us decipher and move through these tricky waters, because right now it's very tricky, and what looks like could be God could actually not be God, because the enemy's going to come and look very deceiving, and so I think it becomes complex, but the only thing that we can really relax and trust in is that He's got our back, and if we're obedient to Him, if we stay in prayer, if we love one another, even if the worst happens to us. I mean, if somebody comes against us and says, choose right now, is it your faith or live, or and die, or compromise and live.
Yes.
We have to come to that conclusion that I'm ready to be all out. I live for the faith in my Messiah, and so I think He's kind of bringing us to that point, as we look and see what's happening in the world around us.
Last question on this topic: do you have any unfulfilled dreams that you feel might still be out there, or anything you might want to talk about?
Well, I want to see, and I'm already seeing this, I want to see my children and my grandchildren kind of take up the mantle, and for us to leave a legacy that they can continue.
That's beautiful.
And we're beginning to see that right now. Of course, I have a daughter that's very much involved in Hebraic ministries, and I have several others that are very much in agreement with it. But I have one that's really making a difference, and her son is also very much connected, and so I'm beginning to see the children and the children's children stand up and say we're going to carry on, and that's really obviously it will be fulfilled maybe after I'm gone, but you're going to see parts of it happen while you're still here, and
that's right,
and that's what
right.
And that's what I'm seeing right now, and that's very fulfilling to me.
That's right. And I think it's natural that as we get older, we look towards that next generation to see God's purposes fulfilled in the next generation, which is every bit as important, if not more important, than what He does in our own life.
And it's not just even our biological children. We're seeing this happening also with those who I consider my spiritual children.
Nice.
And and of course, most of the people that are connected to us are our age.
Nice.
But we also see younger ones that are coming in saying, we want to know what you know, and that blesses me. I'd like to see more of that.
That's beautiful.
We need that next generation to come alongside of us and pick it up.
So the book is Just a Little Girl. Where can we get it?
Well, you can go on Amazon and order it there. Or you can go to your bookstore. If they don't have it there, you can order it from your favorite bookstore. or you could even contact us on our website and we can send you a copy. But the easiest is Amazon. Of course, everything is easy at Amazon, right?
And all proceeds from the book go into
100% goes back into the ministry. We keep nothing from the book.
Why am I not surprised? And the Bethany Center, how would people connect with the things that you have going on here?
VictoriaSarvadi.com
Okay.
is our website, and you can connect to us either there or on Facebook at Dr. Victoria Sarvadi on Facebook.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for opening up your heart, your life, telling us your stories, and there's so much that we can gain from what you've talked about. I'm really, really grateful for the time you spent.
You're very welcome. To God be the glory.
To God be the glory. So there you have it. Bob Odell with Victoria Sarvadi. Great to be with you.
You as well.
Think about what you've heard and look for the glory of God and apply it into your own lives. We have a lot to think about from what we've learned in this interview. Thank you so much for sharing. And until next time, this is Bob Odell with Root Source saying so long and shalom.